On the tiles, among the bushes and flower beds, under the balcony, lay the body of a woman. Her hair was spread out, her left arm was twisted, there were red stripes on her wrists. There was no heartbeat, no pulse, signs of trauma, multiple fractures. Death occurred instantly, during the fall or immediately after. Microscopic cuts and remnants of someone else's skin under the nails were found on Amy's hands, a clear sign that she had struggled. This completely ruled out the suicide version. Strangulation inflicted before the fall was confirmed by the autopsy results: neck injuries, asphyxia. Particular attention was drawn to the syringe found on the kitchen floor. It contained residual yellow liquid. Dear viewers, in the next video releases, you will find very intriguing and confusing cases. And in order not to miss them, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and please like the video. Amy Christine Harwick was born on May 20, 1981 in Selinsgrove, a small town in Pennsylvania. A cozy American outback, where everyone knows each other, and where stars are rarely born. But since childhood, Amy dreamed of more than just the stage or the screen. She was drawn to psychology, spiritual depth, human behavior. She understood early on, the most terrible wars happen not on the streets, but inside a person. She graduated from school with honors. Smart, purposeful, disciplined, but at the same time, dreamy. Her classmates recalled, Amy was always a little different, informal, unconventional, as if from another world. She loved art, read Carl Jung as a teenager, listened to alternative music, and wrote diaries full of philosophical reflections. Teachers said, she is one of those who can see pain through a smile. After school, Harwick moved to California, where, in her words, people aren't afraid to be themselves. She enrolled in the Fashion Institute of Design and Marketing in Los Angeles, FIDM, and briefly immersed herself in the world of fashion. But the glitter of the catwalk quickly became boring. She was much more interested in those who remained behind the scenes. Those who suffered from anxiety, pressure, internal conflicts. Amy radically changed her vector. She received a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then a master's degree from Pepperdine University in clinical psychology, with an emphasis on family and marriage therapy. In her early 30s, she managed to do what others spend their entire lives on. Amy opened her own practice in Los Angeles, where she consulted adults, couples, and people from the entertainment and film industries. Her clients included actors, musicians, and adult industry workers, those whom society often marginalizes. She did not divide people into decent and indecent. She said, everyone needs support, especially those who are forbidden to ask for it. Her approach was bold and modern. Amy was not afraid to discuss sexuality, trauma, anxiety, and PTSD. She believed that open conversations can save lives. In 2014, she published a book, The New Sex Bible for Women, in which she spoke simply and empathetically about female sexuality, self-awareness, and relationships. The book became popular not only among women, but also among specialists who lacked this kind of frank but delicate material. At the same time, she actively spoke in the media, as a consultant, expert, guest of podcasts and TV shows. Her voice was heard on radio stations, in podcasts, at conferences. She became an almost cult figure in the circles of new generation psychotherapists. Sincere, non-judgmental, professional. And yet, despite her public recognition, Amy's personal life could not be called simple. She has spoken openly several times about the difficulties in her past relationships, about how she learned to defend her personal boundaries. In interviews, she has raised the topics of emotional dependence, stalking, control. These topics were not only professional for her, they also concerned her personal experience. But, as always, she spoke about it with dignity and without sacrifice. I'm not here to complain. I'm here to help. In 2017, her name appeared in the headlines of glossy magazines for another reason. Amy began dating a famous TV presenter. Their romance became public. The couple looked happy, and in January 2018, they announced their engagement. However, in the fall of the same year, the engagement was broken. They did not disclose the reasons. It is only known that Amy continued her career and focused on herself. She said that, love is not always forever, but respect should be eternal. In addition to her practice in public speaking, she was actively involved in charity projects. Amy worked with organizations that help victims of domestic violence and collaborated with Pineapple Support, a foundation that provides psychological support to workers in the adult entertainment industry. For many, she literally became a lifeline in a world where no one listens, much less understands. Amy's friends described her as a light in the darkness. She knew how to create a feeling of comfort and safety. She could sit for hours, listening without interrupting. Her voice was soft, her gestures were caring, and her smile was the one that made you want to believe that everything would be fine. She wore black clothes, was a fan of the 90s, adored old films and heavy music, and at the same time knew how to be incredibly feminine and subtle. But, like many deeply feeling people, Amy did not always share what was going on inside her. In her personal journals, which would later become an important part of her story, there were lines that said she often felt anxious, that sometimes she couldn't sleep, that not all fears can be worked through in therapy, some just need to be lived through. By 2020, Amy Harwick had achieved a lot. She was known in her professional environment, respected by her colleagues, and loved by her patients. She lived in a stylish apartment in Hollywood, in a neighborhood with a view of the city. She wrote articles, gave lectures, and planned the second volume of her book. Her days were scheduled down to the minute, but she always found time for her loved ones. On her social media pages, you could see photos with friends, from conferences with cats which she adored. Under each post, there were hundreds of comments with gratitude. "Thank you, you changed my life." And indeed, she changed the lives of many. And it seemed that her own was just beginning, full of plans, energy, and faith that emotional wounds can be healed if you are not afraid to open them. She inspired others not to remain silent, not to be ashamed of pain, not to withdraw into themselves, but to seek support. Her life philosophy could become an epigraph to modern psychology. You don't have to be strong alone. But, as it happens, even the strongest can fail to see the threat. Even those who save others cannot always save themselves. Los Angeles, February 14th, 2020. Friday evening, Valentine's Day. The sky hung pink over the city, the sunset smoothly flowing into the night. People were rushing to restaurants, on dates, some were ordering dinner at home, some were opening wine and watching old romantic movies. For most, it was just another beautiful occasion. For Amy Harwick, it was an evening of solitude, which she was not afraid of. She had long known how to be alone with herself. Amy was busy. She had just finished a busy week, consulting, preparing for a new lecture, corresponding with a publisher about her second book. She spent part of the day calling clients, and then met with friends. In the evening, she returned home to her cozy apartment on the third floor of an apartment building in the Hollywood Hills area. The house was well guarded, coded doors, surveillance cameras, electronic locks. Everything looked safe. The appearance of security is one of the most dangerous illusions. The time is about 1 a.m. CCTV footage shows Amy entering the main hall. She is wearing a black jacket, her hair slightly tousled by the wind, and has a tired but calm smile. She greets the security guard and presses the elevator call button. There is no sign of alarm. She does not know that someone has been waiting for her return for several hours, in the blind spot of the cameras, behind the concrete stairs of the emergency exit. This person entered the building before she arrived. He opened the service door through a stairwell where there was no live video. He knew the layout of the building, knew where there were no cameras, and knew when she would be home alone. He chose a night when most of the neighbors were either absent or asleep after a noisy holiday. He brought gloves, a syringe, a change of clothes, and a plan. 5 minutes after Amy goes up in the elevator, a shadow appears in the frame. The stranger quickly and silently moves to the stairs. The camera captures only a blurry silhouette. His face is hidden by a hood. He does not break down the door. He simply goes down the stairs, enters the desired floor, and disappears from sight. From this moment on, everything happens outside the cameras, out of prying eyes, in the closed space of the apartment, which no one was supposed to enter. What happened in the following minutes can only be reconstructed from indirect data. The door to the balcony was damaged. No signs of forced entry were found on the outside, but the internal latch was broken. Things were scattered chaotically throughout the apartment. The picture was moved, the lamp was broken, one of the chairs was overturned. In the bedroom, there was a blanket on the floor. Next to it was a footprint from a shoe that did not belong to Amy. On the kitchen floor was a syringe with an unidentified yellow liquid, lying without a cap. This would later become the subject of a separate forensic examination. There were almost no moments when Amy could have called for help. Not a single call, not a single message, not a single audio recording. Everything happened too quickly, or too silently. The police would later reconstruct the sequence of events. The attacker had acted quickly and coldly. He had entered through the back door. He had most likely surprised her in the bedroom or bathroom. At first, he had tried to inject liquid from a syringe. An examination would later determine that it contained nicotine concentrate. One full dose is enough to cause cardiac arrest. But either he had failed or he had changed his plan. A struggle had begun. The marks on Amy's neck would indicate mechanical compression, strangulation. However, it was the fall from the balcony that had caused her death. Balcony, 3rd floor, metal railing, almost 9 meters high. He had either pushed her out or thrown her off. It had not been done in a fit of rage, but with intent. The body had not fallen vertically. It had been found 3 meters from the wall, as if it had been thrown. It would later become clear. The balcony had been the final point of this short but terrifying night. Around 1:16 a.m., the neighbor from the 1st floor, Jordan L., heard a loud sound, first like a blow against metal, then something dull and heavy. He looked out the window, but saw nothing suspicious. A few seconds, and silence. He thought someone dropped trash. Nothing more. The security guard at the main entrance noticed something alarming in the cells only in the morning, about 7:30 in the morning. He walked around the territory and, going out into the courtyard, stopped. On the tiles, among the bushes and flower beds, under the balcony, lay the body of a woman. Her hair was spread out, her left arm was twisted, there were red stripes on her wrists. It was Amy Harwick. He called the police and an ambulance. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. There was no heartbeat, no pulse, signs of trauma, multiple fractures. Death occurred instantly, during the fall or immediately after. One of the forensic experts would later say, "This was not an accident. This was murder. Brutal, controlled, and very personal." The police began working at the crime scene as early as 8 a.m. First, the house was cordoned off. Then they began meticulously photographing the scene of the fall. Evidence was collected slowly. Amy's body was carefully transferred to a service van. Neighbors were asked not to go out. The news spread like wildfire. By 11 a.m., journalists began to gather at the house. There were no official statements. In the morning reports, the police only reported, "A woman's body has been found. An investigation is underway. The cause of death is a fall from a height. The circumstances are being established." But those who knew Amy did not doubt for a minute. This was not an accident. She did not jump. She did not stumble. Someone made her die. When the first rays of sun fell on the wet paths of the Hollywood apartment complex, investigators were still working on the territory. The crime scene was cordoned off. Police officers in gloves methodically recorded every detail. A broken balcony door latch, a torn hook, an oddly positioned chair, an unnaturally curved shoe print on the carpet by the door. Morning Los Angeles was waking up. But here time stood still. Here the night did not end. Here life was interrupted. At first, as in any investigation, there were many questions. Why would a woman, smart, sensible, respected, suddenly fall from her own balcony? An accident? Suicide? Or was something that already had a name behind closed doors simply not voiced out loud? From the moment Amy Harwick's body was discovered under the balcony of her apartment, that stage of history began where everything can no longer be changed. You can only understand who did it and why. For the Los Angeles Police Department detectives, this was not just another case of falling from a height. It became clear in the first hours. The person who was doing this knew what he was doing. Carefully, thoughtfully, almost silently. The team of investigators worked in shifts. Every centimeter was carefully photographed. Every item was subjected to examination. Particular attention was drawn to the syringe found on the kitchen floor. It contained residual liquid, which was immediately sent to the forensic lab. Later, experts would establish it was a highly concentrated nicotine solution, in a dosage potentially capable of causing respiratory paralysis in an adult. An unusual, rare method, and at the same time, sophisticated, predatory. As if the killer was preparing to use poison, but for some reason switched to a more direct method. Microscopic cuts and remnants of someone else's skin under the nails were found on Amy's hands, a clear sign that she had struggled. This completely ruled out the suicide version. The autopsy confirmed the strangulation that had occurred before the fall. Neck injuries, asphyxia. However, the official cause of death was still listed as blunt force from a fall from a height. Now the investigation faced the task. Who could have done this? Who entered the house unnoticed, knew the layout, knew where to hide, and most importantly, why? The detectives started with the inner circle. Friends, neighbors, former partners, colleagues. They looked through messages, recent calls, call printouts, and video recordings of entryway cameras. And soon, one detail began to repeat itself too often. The name, Gareth Pursehouse. He appeared in Amy's phone book as a deleted contact. He was in her old records, in her Facebook friends, no longer. But he left a digital trace, old correspondence, incoming calls. One especially important one, made less than a month before her death. Not from her side, from his. Gareth Pursehouse is a man in his 40s, a software engineer who once worked in the photography industry. He met Amy back in 2011, when she was starting her private practice. Their relationship didn't last long, about a year. It ended in a scandal, after which Amy filed for a restraining order twice, claiming that he stalked her, showed up at her house uninvited, wrote obsessive letters, and made physical and psychological threats. Documents confirming this were found in her archive file, including court records, medical consultations, and notes in which she described his behavior in detail. He always said that if he couldn't be with me, no one could. The restraining order officially expired after several years. Amy decided not to renew it. At some point, she thought everything had died down. She started a new life, and she didn't contact Gareth for almost 9 years. Until one evening in January 2020. It was at the XBIZ Awards, an event that honors representatives of the adult entertainment industry, with which Amy worked as a psychotherapist. She came with colleagues, openly, as a guest. At some point, as witnesses said, a man approached her and began to speak loudly, aggressively, with accusations. He called her a traitor, guilty of her life, shouted that she ruined his career and fate. It was Gareth Pursehouse. Security escorted him out of the hall. The incident did not make it into the press. Amy did not want a public conflict. But that evening she told a friend, "He's back again, and I'm scared." She changed the locks on her apartment. She wrote in a notebook, "If something happens, it will be him." She even discussed the possibility of refiling for a restraining order, but she delayed. There was no direct threat, only her fear. Killers often operate in exactly these gray areas, where nothing has been formally violated, but the danger is almost tangible. Detectives matched the dates. Gareth's appearance on XB's, his increased online activity. He searched for Amy's address using her IP address a week before the crime. A trip in a rented car, without a GPS navigator, without a mobile signal, on the night of February 14th to 15th. And, most importantly, his DNA, found on a syringe, as well as under Amy's fingernails. Detectives immediately issued a search warrant for his home. Inside, they found several alarming items: a similar syringe with nicotine residue, latex gloves, notebooks with notes about second chances, duty, purity, and a file on the computer with the title Plan of Final Doc, containing strange notes. Wait by the stairs. Do not turn on the light. Gloves after entering. Gareth was arrested on February 19, 2020, 4 days after the crime. He denied his guilt, He said that he had not seen Amy for months, that everything was a coincidence, that she fell herself. But the investigation already had a puzzle made up of dozens of pieces: DNA, syringes, records, behavior, a history of violence, and the main motive: obsession. A psychologist invited as an expert will say later, Pursehouse is a typical example of an obsessed ex. He could not accept rejection, and his ego was transformed into the idea of destruction. For him, this was not murder, but closure, the way he wanted it. The investigation was completed after 9 months. The collected evidence was submitted to the court. The police announced first-degree murder with the aggravating circumstance of lying in wait and entering a dwelling with intent. The charges were officially filed, and then a new stage began. A trial that will show how ready the justice system is to respond to such crimes. When the trial of Amy Harwick began in the Los Angeles Superior Court, dozens of journalists, cameras, activists, and acquaintances of the deceased gathered around the building. Their presence gave the process the status of not just a legal dispute, but a symbolic battle for the recognition of every woman's right to be heard and protected. The moment has come when a victim of violence ceases to be a statistic. It becomes a personal story demanding justice. The trial lasted almost 2 years, a complex schedule due to the pandemic, numerous administrative delays, medical examinations, and a block of defense motions. All this extended the hearings. The jury was assembled with difficulty. The lawyers worked out every tactic, and the prosecution always had a confident plan to connect the facts into a continuous canvas where every detail spoke of a deliberate murder. Spokesmen for the prosecutor's office have long repeated, "We have enough materials to assemble a mosaic portrait of the crime. It will speak even after the trial." The courtroom was filled with witnesses, friends, and colleagues of Amy. Each of them was given special passes. They were allowed to observe, but not to participate in the process. Many came dressed in dark colors, almost as if in mourning, not because they had finally accepted the loss, but to support each other on the day when the truth will be visible to the whole world. The process was divided into several stages. The first was the chronology. Investigators told minute by minute, step by step, how everything unfolded that night of February 14th, 2020. They tied the camera readings, Amy's return home, to images of a silhouette walking up to the back door. They talked about a syringe with a yellow liquid found in the apartment, test tubes, shoe prints, a broken latch on the balcony door. One of the detectives said bluntly, "This was not an impulsive act of passion. This was an operation." Next came the digital evidence. Reports were presented on the activity of Purshouse's device, his laptop, search queries, internal notes. He was looking for information on bypassing alarms, on how to remove traces of DNA. Every file, every search string, looked like an ingredient in a criminal recipe. The room froze when screenshots were shown with phrases like, "mute, wait on the covered staircase, gloves after entering." Testimonies from Amy's friends revealed the motivation. One friend said that Amy told her about fear. "He comes back. I think he watches me every night." She provided recordings of old messages, sometimes just phrases like, "You are only mine," or, "If not you, no one will." The defense tried to present these words as metaphorical, emotionally charged, but not representing a real threat. But when you listen to these notifications, you feel not a formality, but an actual history of stalking, growing over years. Defense lawyers insisted on a flimsy alibi. They argued that the DNA could have been transferred by accident, that the laptop was hacked or the recordings made afterward, and that no one directly saw Pursehouse on the balcony or in the apartment. Their strategy: to undermine the strength of the evidence, to isolate each element before it fits together. But every defense argument was destroyed by the prosecutor's next move. They cited interviews with a neighbor who heard a loud noise at 1:16 a.m. He said he heard a metallic thump, then a dull thud. He looked out the window and saw only a dark silhouette walking toward a black door. The gait and height of the silhouette matched the description Pursehouse gave later by a witness at the complex. One after another, experts spoke. Criminologists, forensic experts, trace experts, psychologists. They read reports on the injuries to Amy's body: asphyxia, neck injuries, signs of a struggle. blood under the nails. Everything spoke of fierce resistance. And the pathologist's report clearly determined death occurred as a result of a fall from a height, but was initiated by strangulation. In the second stage, they heard witnesses for the defense. A former colleague of Pursehouse appeared, who said that he had spoken about his feelings for Amy many years ago. I didn't think he was serious, but I saw how he wished for her in his fantasies. The lawyer tried to bring it under emotional instability, but not to criminal intent. However, on a nearby laptop belonging to Pursehouse, investigators found a file called Plan-A-Final.doc that contained diagrams of Amy's apartment, notes on how to avoid cameras, a no witnesses instruction, and a step-by-step list of actions. It was a plan written in the defendant's hand. The courtroom grew tense. The audience began whispering to each other, which is unusual when evidence is put together into a living scenario, and not just a set of clues. The final phase is a psychological examination and moral pressure. The psychiatrist concluded that Pursehouse exhibited traits of narcissistic disorder, a pathological inability to accept rejection, and a constant desire for control. His fixation on Amy, reinforced by the previous court order, showed that this was not an episode, but a pattern. He wrote to her, loved her, disappeared, came back, and gradually gathered up anger, pity, and a desire to punish. The episode with the discovery of Amy's diary became a powerful emotional moment. The lines of the last entry were read to the jury. She spoke bluntly, "He's back. I feel him. I tell myself I can protect myself, but if something happens to me, it's him." The words silenced many. They sounded not like a fragment of history, but like a warning ignored at the cost of a woman's life. The prosecutor then took the floor with a closing statement, in which he summarized everything. The criminal had carefully prepared. The evidence showed the presence of premeditated actions. The motive was personal, control and mania, growing into a desire to destroy what refused to control him. In the end, the prosecutor said, he did not simply take her life. He wanted to own her fear. Resistance to him was impossible. He thought he would prove his superiority to himself. This was a deliberate act of execution, a woman who wanted freedom. The court then retired to a closed conference. The jury deliberated the case for 2 full days. There was a tense silence inside the courtroom. It seemed as if even the walls were listening. The deals, the appeals, the legal nuances, all were left behind. The time for the verdict was being counted. And then, in the middle of the day, when the court had not yet had time to fill with new bustle, the entrance hall held its breath. The jurors returned with the members of the jury. The judge looked at them over his glasses. For a second there was silence, as if the voice of justice was about to emerge from the darkness. And then, finally, Gareth Pursehouse is found guilty of first-degree murder. He is sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. At that moment, tears stood in the eyes of Amy's friends. Not from joy, but from the difficult realization that the truth had won, but only when nothing could be changed. The end of the investigation was the beginning of something that could not be fixed in any way, but that could not be forgotten.